American Revolutionary War, fought from 1775 to 1783, was a controversial war fought for the colonists' ideals, beliefs, and their idea of freedom. There are many different assumptions and interpretations on why the war was fought, but this project's purpose is to show the main events that motivated the ideas of freedom for the colonists. We're going to show the main events that motivated the ideas of freedom for the colonists, the events that started the revolution, and how it ultimately ended. First, we're going to start off with the actions of the British Parliament and how the colonists turned those ideas into freedom. Then look at the event battles before and during the war, and then see how it ended. But first is the French and Indian War. Daniel Marston, a military professor and historian, explains how detrimental the French and Indian War was on British government and economy, and how this inflicted the colonies as well. The French and Indian War was a confrontation between the French and English empires. The English ultimately won the war, but this was all at a major cost. The English received an abundance of land from the French, but the war was very costly and left the English government in major debt. The English Parliament then placed multiple acts, taxes, and many other burdens onto the colonists. This event is arguably a major stepping stone to the American Revolution and the ideals of freedom for the colonists. Eugene M. Del Papa is an American historian and explains what exactly the proclamation is. The proclamation of 1763 was put into place by King George III, and his intentions were in the right place with a Hobbesian perspective. King George wanted to limit colonist and British expansion west into Native American territory. The proclamation denied colonists thousands of acres of land, kicked out any colonists already living beyond the proclamation line, and destroyed any new ideas of expansion going west. The colonists already had the weight of taxes coming from the Parliament, but now they started to feel trapped, and they couldn't expand on their own Lockean ideals and beliefs. Arthur Schleisner was an American historian and writes how local newspapers used these acts passed by the British Parliament and used it as propaganda against the British, and how colonists pushed for colonial independence. The Stamp Act arguably upset the colonists the most. The Stamp Act was passed by British Parliament and it imposed tax onto the colonists. It required all the colonists to pay a tax on every piece of printed paper they printed and used. With the rise of taxes, closed off from exploration, and taboo ideas of freedom on the rise, more and more colonists were pushing for independence. In reality, there were no real conflicts between the English and the colonists until our next event of the Boston Massacre. Reese Phelps Kellogg is an American historian and goes into detail on what exactly happened that night in Boston. Details on the soldiers that fired upon the crowd, and how the colonists used the massacre as propaganda and a major push for independence. Tensions were relatively low, and no major battles or confrontations had broken out until this cold, bloody night. An angry mob of colonists had surrounded multiple British soldiers and a captain. The mob started hurling snowballs with rocks inside at the soldiers. Once the British felt in danger, the captain gave the order to fire. There were multiple deaths and multiple wounded colonists that night. This painted the perfect picture for the colonists who wanted independence from British rule. Schleisner explains how the Boston Tea Party was a planned outbreak to boost colonist morale for the fight for independence. The colonists knew that the British economy was suffering, and the colonists are being battered with all the new Parliament acts coming into the colonies, so a group of rebel extremists called the Sons of Liberty acted upon the opportunity to hurt the British even more. The extremist group boarded onto a British ship full of millions of dollars worth of tea. They dressed as Indians to disguise themselves and dumped hundreds of gallons into the harbor. This enraged King George, and he soon retaliated with the signing of the Intolerable Acts. These acts would soon cause more aggravation against British rule. Robert F. Oakes is an American historian that helps us interpret what our founding fathers were trying to do with the British at the First Continental Congress. The Founding Fathers' first intentions were not to promote revolution in any. In fact, they sent King George a compromise to try to lessen tensions between the colonists and England itself. Everyone was on the same side. There was still a mixture of loyalists, patriots, and some were conflicted between the two. Once King George received the letter, he instantly threw it away, not even laying an eye upon it. Soon the Congress sent their Parliament their Declaration of Rights. The colonists saw this as a sense of courage as the Congress stood up to the mighty British Empire. Frank Luther Mott is an American historian and shows us insight of colonial newspapers' insight before and after the battles. He first explains how local newspapers knew high tensions were brewing between the two nations, and it was only a matter of time before violence erupted. Once the British heard of word of cache of weapons being stored in Concord, they rounded up their armies and headed to Concord. The Patriots cut off the British at Yorktown, and the first shots of the Revolution had erupted. There were some British casualties, but the colonists suffered an embarrassing defeat. Once news broke out of colonists killed on the battlefield, local newspapers started printing, hoping that the other colonies would soon join the revolution. Harvard Law and Review Association compares the Virginia Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and shows how similar they are to one another. Thomas Jefferson used the Virginia Bill of Rights and borrowed many ideas and included them into the Declaration. Such as the Declaration states all men are created equal, the Virginia Bill of Rights states all men are by nature equally free and independent. This is a small example of many of the borrowed ideas. The Declaration of Independence now completely separated the colonies from the British rule, and now the Founding Fathers knew they had a fight on their hands. On July 4th, 1776, a new nation was born, but now they had to defend what they started. John D. Granger is an American historian and goes in depth of the Battle of Yorktown. This battle, along with Saratoga, were the two main decisive victories for the colonial army. Saratoga, because it proved the French army that the Americans could keep up in a fight against the British Empire, and then Yorktown, the nail in the coffin for the British army. It wasn't until 2 years later until the British army was completely pushed out of the colonies. The American Revolutionary War was a fight for ideals, not entirely for freedom or independence. The colonists weren't allowed to fully grasp their Lockean ideals thanks to the Hobbesian ideals of the British. But thanks to the colonists and the major events, America won the Revolutionary War.